Hi, everyone. It's 4 o'clock here in Miami, but we start with the fireworks in Washington, D.C. today, emanating from the committee set up by the House GOP. First, it took Republicans 15 votes to arrive upon a candidate to be their speaker. And now in the days and months that have followed, the House GOP has actually done next to nothing except subjecting the rest of their colleagues and the rest of us to the grievances, lies, and conspiracies that animate life over on Earth 2, where they live. Today, a hearing by the so-called Weaponization Committee, presumably focused on censorship on social media, and a lawsuit brought by the then Republican Attorney General of Missouri. He now happens to be a senator from Missouri. It's Eric Schmidt, pushing back against efforts by social media giants to fight disinformation. Schmidt was one of two witnesses brought forward by Republicans, the Republican majority on this committee, who testified and then was dismissed, sent away before Democrats could ask one single question. So much for a functioning committee in which the free exchange of ideas and sharing of witnesses prevails. Democrats were justifiably and understandably outraged. So here's what happened when a Republican member tried to submit evidence from one of the excused witnesses. Watch.
Seek unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter dated January 12, 2021 by Louisiana Attorney General Jeff Landry, where he decries all political violence and calls for an end to that and asks for respect for all political viewpoints.
Without objection.
Another thing we can examine because he's not here. Very good.
No, you can
Thank
examine
you.
it. It's a document. He's going to
No, examine him for what he wrote and the intent behind what he said.
Well, I would just point out that that's unanimous consents are for documents, and we got the document right here that he handed to you.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask.
That's about how things are going on that committee. Democrats countered the Republican focus on censorship. They said that what their Republican colleagues are really doing, what they're really demanding, is a permission structure, license really, to freely spread disinformation. One of their witnesses pointed out some of the most prominent purveyors of disinformation actually sit on the committee. Watch.
Members of this committee have claimed that Dominion voting machines fraudulently flipped votes from Trump to Biden. That is false. Members of this committee have claimed that thousands of ballots were cast on behalf of dead and unqualified voters. That is false. Members of this committee have claimed that election workers around the country counted fake or fraudulent votes. That is false. And on October 19th, 2020, Chairman Jordan tweeted that Democrats are trying to steal the election after the election. That is false.
Facts are facts. And as we know, as every member of the Weaponization Committee learned on January 6, disinformation has real world consequences. Here's Delegate Stacey Plaskett on that.
And Senator Schmidt and Mr. Landry, the two witnesses who were dismissed before their extreme and false claims could be tested under cross-examination, played an active role in that. They were a key part of the Republican Attorney General's Association, which sponsored a robocall urging people to come to the Capitol on January 6th. That's what they were here for in their role as Attorney Generals during that time.
Calling from the Broadwater Defense Fund with an important message. The March to Save America is tomorrow in Washington, D.C. at the Ellipse in President's Park, between East Street and Constitution Avenue on the south side of the White House, with doors opening at 7 o'clock a.m. At 1 o'clock p.m., we will march to the Capitol building and call on Congress to stop the steal. We are hoping patriots like you will join us to continue to fight to protect the integrity of our elections. For more information, visit marchtosafeamerica.com. This call is paid for and authorized by the Rule of Law Defense Fund, 202-796-5838.
We just witnessed what was just given to us right now was real evidence, facts. We just witnessed our very real crimes and violence that erupted because of what these witnesses' actions did. If they had been here, I'd ask them about that.
An effort today on Capitol Hill to push back against the Republican majority with facts by Democrats serving on the House GOP's committee focused on spreading disinformation. It's where we begin today. One of the Democratic members of that subcommittee joins us, Congresswoman Linda Sanchez of California. Also joining us, former Republican Congressman David Jolly is here. And one of the founders of Punchbowl News, Jake Sherman, is here. David and Jake are MSNBC contributors. Congresswoman, I know that Democrats have 9 members, Republicans have 12, but it seems that the work product and the effort to be substantive is an area in which Democrats are running circles around their Republican counterparts. I want to get at what was sort of clashing violently in terms of truth and lies today. But I want to start with just the fundamental competency of this committee. It seems to be lacking. This was the single branded effort of the Republican majority, something they started talking about before the midterms. And it seems to be embarrassing even to them. Is that how you see it? And do you think that's how they see it?
Oh, I absolutely think that it's embarrassing for them. What they are doing is just bringing witnesses who are making all kinds of wild allegations and bringing up these grievances, and they have no facts to support anything that their witnesses said. And every single Republican witness that appeared before the committee today was part of the effort to overturn the 2020 election results. That tells you about all you need to know about what that committee is up to. And the fact that it is stacked on the Republican side with Donald Trump's staunchest defenders and supporters should lead people to have a very healthy skepticism of what exactly is going on there. I mean, it is embarrassing that they had witnesses show up, testify, and then they scurried out so that their veracity, their truthfulness couldn't be tested by questioning. Because I suspect that had they stuck around, we would have dissected all of the lies that they are pushing and made them look like the, conspiracy theorists and extremists that they really are.
So the way it works is that its chairman, Jim Jordan, brings people on and only lets Republicans ask questions and then sends them away before Democrats can? Is that what's happening?
No. They brought witnesses to testify, so they give 5 minutes of testimony, and generally speaking, then both sides can question those witnesses. He excused the witnesses and they scurried off. Neither side could ask questions, but that's how you test the truth of what people are saying. That's how you get at the allegations and ask people to prove what they are saying with facts. And I mean, there just aren't facts to support, like I said, these wild allegations that they're making that have no basis in facts or reality.
I want to show our viewers a little bit more of what Democrats sought to do today to inject facts and reality. I have some of Delegate Plaskett's questioning about real threats, real weaponization of justice. It's just that it's Republicans carrying out those acts. Let me play that first.
Mr. Chairman, you and other members of this body have sent multiple letters in your capacity as chairman to seek to interfere in the investigation of the president by a duly elected state representative and demanding that District Attorney Bragg appear for a transcribed interview in a matter that is under criminal investigation. That is not appropriate. That is not what this Congress is supposed to be about. That is an abuse of the power of this body, of this committee, and that is the weaponization of Congress, plain and simple.
What, if any, response did the Democrats on the committee receive with that inconvenient truth being inserted into today's hearing?
Effectively none. I mean, Chairman Jordan just rolls over everything and diminishes and moves on. But the fact of the matter is they are trying to use the legislative branch to interfere in the judicial branch in an ongoing investigation, which we have a separation of branches of government for a reason. And what I suspect is going on here, no, I know it's going on, is a little bit of projection, because they want to say that the Biden administration is weaponizing the government when, in fact, it is the Republicans. The committee is stacked with Donald Trump cronies. They are trying to interfere in an ongoing investigation into Donald Trump because they want to protect him. They want to intimidate the judicial branch from prosecuting what are, crimes that have been committed by the former president. That is the textbook definition of weaponization and abuse of power, and it's going on right now in broad daylight. And if that doesn't scare the American public, it really should.
I want to show you another example of what you just talked about or alluded to, and that's projection. This is your colleague, Congressman Goldman, on the topic of book bans.
Now, you want to talk about censorship? You imagined in your opening statement a world where the FBI sends a list of books that should be pulled from their shelves. Luckily, we don't have to imagine that, sir. Are you aware that recent laws in Florida have resulted in the mass removal of books that are now banned in public schools?
I don't know about Florida. I do know that we have sworn testimony from FBI agent Elvis Chan that directly backs up the analogy I drew in my opening statement.
Okay, well, you should go look into this.
Expired.
You should go look into it because Florida right now is banning books, and you would agree that's a violation of the First Amendment.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman's time's expired.
Can the witness answer the question?
No, because you were over your time. And because you addressed the chair, I'll tell you, stay tuned, Mr. Goldman. There's much more to come in this committee.
It would be funny if it weren't so bleak. It's like a DMV office in Belarus or something. Whoops, we're closed. Can't answer the question. What is the purpose of this if they don't have the confidence in their witnesses to actually engage on the substance?
I mean, it's embarrassing, and the hypocrisy is just thick in that committee. And I would suggest that, you know, if my colleagues were less interested in banning books and more interested in reading them, then this committee would just be disbanded. I mean, we call it the Insurrection Protection Committee for a reason. All they're trying to do is perpetuate these conspiracy theories, these lies about the 2020 election. They're trying to blame it on Joe Biden. I mean, this has been litigated time and time again in the courts. There's been no fraud that would have impacted the election. And, you know, I honestly don't know how they can continue with this committee, again, in the glaring lack of any real true evidence that supports any of these crazy allegations that they're making.
Congresswoman, stay with us. I want to bring into the conversation someone who covers the body and someone who once served in it. Jake, you have to suspend reality to even go along with the straight face with the people on this committee. I mean, it is like the rogues gallery of apologists and defenders for the big lie that led to the deadly insurrection, that led to 140 officers being wounded, some with trauma they'll deal with forever, some with physical wounds that ended their careers in law enforcement. Where does the audacity, not just to do this, but to do this in such a subpar performative way come from?
Well, I'll put some context here, Nicolle. Jim Jordan, who's the chairman of the Weaponization Committee, is not only the chairman of the Weaponization Committee, but also the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, also somebody who's in charge of immigration policy, overseeing the FBI, the Department of Justice. And when he created the Weaponization Committee, when Republicans created it and Jordan took it over, they demanded a budget as big as the January 6th committee and have gotten it. That was a concession from the speaker's race that Kevin McCarthy gave into. Jim Jordan is the most powerful Republican in the House, period. I mean, maybe aside from McCarthy, but I would even put Jordan up there. He's what we call at Punchbowl News the Uber chairman. I mean, he is the chairman of so much. He has so much influence, so much power, so much staff. You know, that should be taken for what it is in Republican circles and more broadly. But yeah, listen, there's a real peril here, Nicolle, politically for Republicans, because polls that the leadership sees, and I know they see it because I've talked to them about it, shows that these investigations are broadly unpopular. Not only these, but most investigations are not popular because people see inflation high, you know, food costing too much, all of those things. And they say, why is Congress going on and on about this, that, or the other thing? Why aren't they doing anything to help me? So that is the danger in carrying out these investigations for too long of a period of time, that is.
Jake, I think right now you're accustomed to this. I think all of this sort of normal context and contextualizing of a person standing in their caucus is really important, but it's why his incompetence is the story that we're leading with today. As you just said, Jim Jordan is the most powerful Republican in the body. Kevin McCarthy wouldn't be Speaker if not for Jim Jordan. He's also
That's true.
Devoted to, other than never wearing a jacket, investigating Donald Trump in ways that aid him politically but aren't rooted in any facts. So the fact that this, I'll call it bad faith, you can call it whatever you want, jihad, that he got a mountain of money. You just described a money truck being backed up and poured onto this effort. The fact that it is so shabby, the fact that the witnesses are so subpar, the fact that the 9 Democrats to the 12 Republicans are so scary to Jim Jordan that they're not allowed to ask any questions, that feels like a bigger part of the story that maybe if you're staring at the trees, the forest isn't as obvious. Why does he suck at this?
Well, I do like the no jacket look, as you could see, so I hope we don't lump that in his shabbiness. But I do think that, listen, a lot of these Republicans, Jordan included, have been living in an echo chamber in which reality is not reality and things are upside down. And I think that is true for not only Jim Jordan, not only the majority of the Weaponization Committee, but the majority of the House Republican Conference has been sucked into a vortex in which up is down and down is up. And any interruption of that worldview, Nicolle, is not welcome. And anything they could do to control that narrative, they are going to do. I am surprised that there were no questions. I've never seen that in a congressional hearing that I've covered in my life. But any interruption of that worldview is a threat. And I hate to put it so bluntly, but you bring out the blunt in me, Nicolle. But yeah, any interruption of that worldview is a threat to these Republicans.
So I guess, David Jelly, what we're back at is what's the point? I mean, just go on the 8 p.m. hour on Fox News if you don't want to be interrupted in your delusions. Yeah. I mean, I think that the Dominion lawsuit proves that there's free reign for things that even the hosts know are delusional. Why does this exist? And are you surprised by what a bad job they're doing, even over there on Earth 2, by their own standards?
Yeah, look, it's easy to laugh it off, but I think it would be wrong to, because I think there's a bit of a blinking red light here, Nicolle, in watching what has transpired with this committee and the shutting down of any opportunity to examine witnesses. And that blinking red light is around this. It suggests a permanency to this Republican thread of both protecting insurrectionists, but also undermining our federal institutions and federal agencies, which is ultimately what they seek to do with this committee. And then it also suggests that they really are not interested in any public debate, but in sending these clips straight to Fox News, where it doesn't matter what the other side could have possibly done. And the reason that's a blinking red light is understand what they're trying to do. The Weaponization Committee suggests that there is a victim to the weaponization, and they're suggesting that it's you, conservative America. It's the American people that the government is after. And so you'll see them attack the FBI for trying to work with social media, when what the FBI and law enforcement actually does with social media is to try to prevent terrorist attacks and get involved in situations where information needs to be mined to protect the safety of the American people. And the other one they like to attack is around COVID. And what you see in government actors, particularly since the Biden administration, but certainly under CDC and NIH, was this effort to advance public health and actual science, and to ask social media platforms to diminish or shut down true misinformation that would risk public health, in the case of injecting bleach into your arms or taking horse pills or whatever it was. But what they are seeking to accomplish, and I think what we can learn from their behavior today, is that they intend to continue to tell the American people, your government is after you. And if they're after you, you have a right to rise up against it. That is the thread that led to January 6th. It's why the important work of Congresswoman Sanchez and her colleagues on the committee to insist on true facts is so important. But in the Republican ecosystem, it may not matter. It's a blinking red light for how they intend to enter the 24 cycle, I'm afraid.
David Jolly, I never disagree with you, and I don't on the whole, but let me just push back respectfully. I think that the result of their work is what you just said, these unfiltered snippets, but they didn't need that. They have an entire network. And frankly, again, you read through the Dominion lawsuit, there's so much that's proliferated on the right that you can get out any kind of message. I mean, frankly, on the right, on disinformation, Fox may have higher standards than other outlets. I think that what they believed is that John Durham missed something. I think they actually thought there was something to be found to be some revelation that Jim Jordan would find that John Durham didn't. And I think the fact these two things happened at the same time, a massive years-long investigation into lack of ethics, potentially even some prosecutorial corruption or malfeasance in the Durham probe happens right as Jim Jordan's, getting geared up. And so someone that's good at this failed. I think that he got, the hot air balloon all gassed up, ready for takeoff. And again, I don't know if they're capable of seeing or hearing reality, but understands that there is nothing to be revealed. There is nothing.
Well, unless they've convinced themselves that there truly is. And understand some of these younger members who have just been elected came up in the Trump conspiracy world and this crazy right-wing conspiracy world around COVID and around the FBI and around the Russia probe and everything else. And they got elected platforming those conspiracies. And I know many of them truly believe them. Does Jordan believe them or not? I think he does. I don't think he's a particularly smart guy. I just think he's a cagey guy. But clearly someone who falls for these conspiracies for the last 6 years and follows someone like Donald Trump, we could not suggest as a person of intellect. Instead, he's a person willing to embrace a conspiracy. And then the final piece of this, Nicolle, is the reason they will continue to pursue it is because they have nothing else. Right. First, the reality is they won't have any legislative accomplishments just simply because Joe Biden's in the White House and Democrats control the Senate, but also because it is now a party devoid of any policies or ideology. It is this notion of the government's coming for you and we are going to be your protector and in the fight with you. That is the true danger. Those are the themes that led to January 6th.
Congresswoman, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, Nicolle, it's true they could just upload these snippets to Fox News, but it's important to them to create this appearance through using the committee structure, using the committee rooms to give this imprimatur of, this is serious and this is real. Because I think if you take the actors out of that set and put them elsewhere, then people would see them for the nuts that they really are. But I think it's important for them to have the trappings that this is somehow some kind of serious pursuit. And I think you're right that at the end of the day, the American public's going to scratch their head and say, how does this help make my life easier?
Right.
What are they doing to, bring down healthcare costs for me? Or what are they doing to, help make energy more affordable? They're not doing anything. They're doing these investigations, these so-called investigations. And I think at the end of the day, they're going to end up with nothing. And the American people are the ones that are going to suffer.
It is amazing. It is an amazing spectacle. I was riveted by the news that started to come out. So I'm really grateful to you, Congresswoman Linda Sanchez, and to you, Jake Sherman. You should never wear a jacket. You heard that from me. Thank you for starting us off with your firsthand accounts of it. David Jolly sticks around for the hour. When we come back, more on what Democrats today have been saying is the real weaponization. The twice impeached ex-president has been railing about the people who he thinks in his imagination are out to get him for years. But the New York Times fact checks all of that with a brand new piece of reporting with new interviews from former senior White House officials who say Trump was the leader, consumed with doing the exact same thing he rants about to this day. Plus, Rupert Murdoch privately calling Trump's election lies, quote, pretty much a crime, end quote. More just redacted emails just released that reveal the extent of the right-wing media empire knew that Trump's lies had inevitably led to the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. And we'll bring you an exclusive interview with a former Fox News producer on her lawsuit against that network. Later in the show, the legal battle over key witness testimony called for in special counsel Jack Smith's January 6th probe continues. The former lead investigator for the congressional probe will join us to go through what those big witnesses could offer Jack Smith. All those stories and more when Deadline White House continues after a quick break. Don't go anywhere today.
Hi, I'm Tom Llamas, and for me, the news is so much more than a headline. It informs, it inspires, and it still matters. To cover it, you have to be in it. We'll take you to the front lines of the story, where it's actually happening, with NBC News journalists on the ground from all over the world. We cover what you need to know and bring your newsfeed to life. In primetime and streaming live, it's your news playlist. Join me for Top Story, weeknights at 7 Eastern on NBC News Now.
I am a victim of one of the great political smear campaigns in the history of our country.
The entire thing has been a witch hunt, and there is no collusion.
If they were lawyers, they'd be disbarred for what they're doing. There's a one-sided witch hunt. And I'm a victim, I will tell you. I'm a victim. Oh, they're after me for so many things. Oh, those prosecutors.
The Biden regime's weaponization of law enforcement against their political opponent is something straight out of the Stalinist Russian horror show.
It's something, right? Coming from him, claims about abuse of power, weaponization, lawyers being disbarred, being smeared. Claims about weaponization have always been about projection, and we don't need degrees in psychology to understand that. And frankly, an admission, sometimes even a prediction of his own guilt. In a new piece of reporting in the New York Times titled, "Trump Says the Justice System Has Been Weaponized," he would know, we learn even more firsthand accounts of exactly how, as president, Trump tried to work and manipulate the criminal justice system as a cudgel to use against his political rivals. From his second White House chief of staff, John Kelly, this, quote, "He was always telling me that we need to use the FBI and IRS to go after people. It was constant and obsessive and is just what he's claiming is being done to him now. I would tell him why it was wrong. And while I was there, I did everything I could to steer him away from it and tell him why it was a bad idea," Mr. Kelly said. Joining our conversation, New York Times Washington correspondent Mike Schmidt, whose byline is on that new reporting. David Jolly is still here. Mike Schmidt, this feels like the bluntest accusation John Kelly has leveled against Donald Trump. There it is in your story in black and white, accusing him of seeking to use DOJ and the IRS against his political enemies. Tell us more.
Look, this was a story that looked at the ways that Trump tried to use the Justice Department proactively to go after his enemies. And I've always seen that type of behavior as falling sort of distinctly into its own bucket. There was the obstruction bucket that we knew a lot about, Trump's attempts to throw sand in the gears of all of these inquiries that were looking at his conduct. That's not the way the system's supposed to work. And, people can be prosecuted for it. But there was this other bucket, which, for lack of a better term, I called the sort of proactive bucket, where Trump was trying to proactively use the government's powers to target his rivals. And I think there's an insidiousness to that type of behavior that is distinct. And it really shows someone bent on trying to use the sacred powers of the federal government. And with Trump, we didn't just see it on the law enforcement side. As Kelly says, Trump was talking about trying to use the IRS. As we saw in the weeks after the 2020 election, when Trump had a different crew than was there when Kelly was there around him, Trump was trying to use the powers of the Pentagon to help him overturn the election results. So you have this enormous body of behavior that went on when he was there. And, comments from folks like Kelly talking about how he tried to steer Trump away from that. And now fast forward to 2023, and Donald Trump is claiming that he is the victim of this type of behavior. And that's obviously just rich.
I mean, but Mike, between when Kelly says he was there and tried to do what he could to block this in 2023 when he's projecting, a lot of these people did end up investigated. Even if they weren't prosecuted by DOJ, their lives were dramatically disrupted by investigations. Jim Comey, Andy McCabe. We learned from Jeffrey Berman's book, and I know that's also in your story, that John Kerry was investigated. I mean, it seems like DOJ did not exactly hold strong against Trump's stated desires.
Well, I think that you raised a really important point, which is that of all the investigations that have gone on, we've never seen a full, thorough, deep dive by someone who has a badge or a gun or the power of subpoena to look at how Trump tried to weaponize the federal government against his enemies. And I just think it's a distinct type of behavior than the other behavior that we saw. And I'll leave it up to the former federal prosecutors to assess, whether it's illegal or not illegal. But it has larger ramifications than that, because it has we now have all of these different examples of a president of the United States who tried to use the Justice Department against his enemies. Like, imagine if one of those people had actually been prosecuted and thrown in jail. That would have been a pretty extraordinary thing. A lot of these people were investigated. People in the media had their phone records taken. I had my phone records taken. Why did that happen? When you have someone like Donald Trump who's out there saying that he wants to use the power of the Justice Department against his enemies, it's very difficult to accept on its face what the department was doing at the time. Why did they take my phone records? I don't know. We'll never know. But was it because Trump told them to do it, or is it because they were following the law and following the facts? And Trump has cast that shadow over everything that went on at his Justice Department because of just his public rhetoric, and not even talking about what he tried to do in private.
But, Mike, it's not unknowable. I mean, has General Kelly offered to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee and answer questions like the ones he answered for you about exactly what he's talking about when he says Trump sought to use the IRS and DOJ against his political enemies?
What's interesting about Kelly is that we've never really heard from Kelly in any of these investigations because of some savvy lawyering by Emmett Flood when he came into the White House. Kelly was shielded from the Mueller investigation. He did a very short interview with the Mueller investigation that was contained to certain issues because of the way that Emmett Flood had basically outmaneuvered the special counsel's office and Mueller on that issue. I don't know of any investigation or investigators that have ever spoken to Kelly. Certainly Kelly, was not a public witness at the impeachment trial. I don't think he's someone that the January 6th committee spoke to. But my guess of General Kelly, that if, General Kelly is the type of person that if he was served with a subpoena or asked questions by, Congress or investigators, he would answer them. John Kelly's a guy who's a product of the military and, by all accounts was someone who tried to contain Trump.
David Jolly, just real quick, and apropos of the conversation we had in the last block, there actually is a legitimate line of questioning about the politicization of the federal government. It just isn't remotely what the Republicans on this clown committee are doing. It is serious work for serious, and if Republicans are interested in participating, that wouldn't shock the pants off of me. I mean, why doesn't the Senate Judiciary Committee in a bipartisan manner try to understand what General Kelly's talking about when he says Trump sought to politicize the IRS and DOJ against his rivals?
Historically, the Senate has not been the place for some of these high-profile investigations, but I think you're exactly right. Senate Democrats need to step up to the plate here because it's the only team that could possibly do it, because it's clearly dangerous. And what I'm currently captivated by is kind of the permanency of Trumpism and the Trump tactic. I used to think that Donald Trump himself was uniquely dangerous, would shred the Constitution, but other Republican candidates would be dangerous in pushing far-right ideologies, but would do it within the framework of the Constitution. I'm not sure I believe that's the case anymore. I think that the theory of using the federal government against your political enemies is something we saw with Nixon, we saw with Trump. It may be a brand now for DeSantis and others, and we are in that cycle where we are watching, will the Republican Party move past Trumpism, or will this type of abuse of power be part of the permanency of the Republican Party and fearfully what might be the next administration? I think that's the dangerous question we have to approach.
Well, and Congress has a role in answering it. I mean, because are they going to be a co-equal branch? I mean, they let Trump run all over them. They got Don McGahn, deep into the Biden presidency to finally answer questions. I mean, I think there's a question to Congress, too. Are you going to see things like this in news stories and do your part in understanding how DOJ and the IRS, which is almost as shocking, were politicized? Mike Schmidt, thank you for the reporting and for joining us to talk about it. David Jolly sticks around for the hour. Up next for us, former Fox News producer turned whistleblower speaking out today exclusively to NBC News about what she has to say about her case, her lawsuit against her former employer, Fox News. That is next.
It was a pitch-black night in the high desert. Sheriff's Deputy Billy Cox drove over the park and ride in Palmdale. Something very wrong around that bright blue Mustang. A woman's left leg and bare foot were hanging out of the door. L.A. County Homicide Detective Richard Longshore was sound asleep when he got the call.
There are cases that you will take home with you at night, and that will last till the end of your life.
I'm Keith Morrison, and this is The Girl in the Blue Mustang, a podcast from Dateline.
Listen now for free wherever you get your podcasts.
So we're just about 2.5 weeks ahead of the curtain rising in the historic, unprecedented $1.6 billion Dominion lawsuit against Fox News. And we are today hearing from the former producer turned whistleblower at the red-hot center of this case for the very first time. Abby Grossberg was a producer at Fox News who, in a dramatic plot twist, announced she was suing her former employee, alleging, among other things, that Fox lawyers tried to position her, not the Murdochs, not the primetime anchors, but her, to take the fall for Fox's repeated airing of conspiracy theories and lies about Dominion voting systems by doing this, quote, coaching her in a coercive and intimidating manner before her deposition. We should share that Fox News has called Grossberg's claims, quote, patently false. But now Grossberg is speaking out in an NBC News exclusive with my colleague Cynthia McFadden. Watch.
In the course of a couple of weeks after the election, Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani appeared 4 times on the show that you were producing. Do you think that any of what they said added to what eventually happened on January 6th?
It took me a long time to connect those dots. I don't think that we'll ever quite know that for sure, but I do know that Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell gave Fox viewers and the American people false hope that this election could be overturned.
It wasn't just giving them false hope that they could overturn the outcome. It was also saying that the election had been rigged. I mean, that's what they were essentially saying over and over again. The election had been rigged.
I almost don't, looking back on it, think it's so much about politics as it is about a major corporation programming for ratings that they don't necessarily understand impact people's emotions and get them upset and get them outraged to where they want to take action. And that's a great, great responsibility that's not being considered.
It's an unbelievable window into Fox News, right? And as you just heard, Grossberg says it took her, quote, a long time to connect those dots between the conspiracy theories peddled by Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell on Fox News and the brutality and death and bloodshed we all witnessed on January 6th. But based on newly public emails, Dominion shook loose during the discovery process, some of which we shared with you on this program yesterday. It appears that someone else was connecting the dots more quickly. And that's Rupert Murdoch. This is an email from January 20th, 21, from Rupert Murdoch to his son, Lachlan Murdoch, and Fox CEO Suzanne Scott. It says this, quote, Trump insisting on the election being stolen and convincing 25% of Americans was a huge disservice to the country. Pretty much a crime, all caps. Pretty much a crime. Inevitable, it blew up on January 6th. Best we don't mention his name unless essential, and certainly don't support him. Pretty much a crime? What? Inevitable that it blew up on January 6th? Wow. Joining us now, NBC News senior investigative and legal correspondent, the woman who conducted that fantastic interview, Cynthia McFadden. She sat down for that exclusive interview with former Fox News producer Abby Grossberg. Also joining us, longtime constitutional scholar, law professor at Harvard. Our friend Laurence Tribe is also here. Cynthia, take me through this stunning conversation.
Well, part of this is about whether they were putting things on the air. I mean, the lawsuit, the Dominion suit really is banked on, did Fox knowingly put on the air this slanderous, untrue material? Did they know, or should they have known? And one of the fascinating things that Grossberg said to me, I asked her, I mean, come on, you're putting these people on the air day after day saying this stuff. What did Fox want you to do about fact-checking? Let me read to you what she said to me. I received a text message from my boss saying, you can let Maria Bartiromo, who was the host of the show, know there will be no fact-checking today. She can do what she wants. Go wild. So,
oh my God,
I find that, stunning. And she in her conversation, she says, "Listen, we did not investigate whether what these two were saying was true, but we were doing this because we believe this is what our bosses wanted. At least in her case, she says, I believe this is what my bosses wanted."
Cynthia, she doesn't deny them, to the point of what you just read, being in receipt of multiple communications about the fact that what those people were saying on her show, the show she produced, was not true.
No, she says that she was essentially the only staff person on the show. She was not the executive producer. There was not an executive producer. She was the senior producer, and it was essentially she and Maria doing the show. She said, yeah, she got a lot of emails from Dominion. She didn't read all of them. She acknowledges that. And listen, journalistic practice 101 would suggest that this was not a good position to be in. When I challenged her about this, she says that she didn't feel she had any choice, that to keep her job, she just had to keep putting the stuff on television, regardless of whether she was able to determine whether it was true or false.
The whole conversation is amazing. Cynthia McFadden, thank you so much for joining us to talk about it. You can see more of Cynthia's interview with former Fox producer turned whistleblower Abby Grossberg tonight on NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt. Laurence Tribe. I am not a lawyer. I feel like if I could go back and do my life again, I would go to law school so I could cover the Trump era better. But my understanding is that all of these communications in the record and all of this acknowledgement of receiving the fact checks and all of this written communications from Fox's own editorial hub, the brain room, that's a really damaging set of legal facts for Fox News in this case.
Damaging puts it mildly. You would obviously do very well in law school. I think law schools could learn a lot from you. When Abby Grossberg says that she got the signal that perhaps they didn't want fact checking, we know that because in the unredacted material that came out, I think just yesterday, Suzanne Scott, the CEO of Fox, said when she saw something as terrible as fact-checking going on, this has got to stop now. It's hurting our bottom line. This has got to stop. So just as you quoted Rupert Murdoch saying that he basically knew that it was pretty much a crime, the big lie about the election having been stolen, we know that the CEO of Fox was fully aware that they were putting out false information. Alternative facts would be a kind way of putting it. The standard that the Supreme Court set, and I don't think you would need to go to law school to learn this because it's now very well known across the spectrum. The standard is if you are guilty of reckless or knowing falsehood that injures the reputation of something like Dominion or of any other public company or public figure, then you are liable. Reckless or knowing falsehood is written on every page of the material in this case. And if I were Judge Davis presiding over this case, I would give very serious consideration to granting summary judgment to Dominion. That is to say, there is no genuine dispute about whether Fox and the people who ran it knew that they were putting out lies. Let's move to the damages phase. He may or may not do that, but this is as strong a case as I have seen in 50 years of studying constitutional law and the First Amendment, as strong a case as I have ever seen for ruling in favor of the plaintiff based on just what we already know and what has been admitted by the defendant.
What is the meaning or significance legally to all that Dominion is putting into the record and all that the judge has released about the motive? Because you're right, it is beyond dispute at this point. Both Fox News's own brain room, their editorial hub, and Dominion's 3,280 messages into Fox where a receipt was acknowledged by senior people at Fox make it abundantly clear they knew these things were lies. But so much of what we're seeing in the filing centers around the motive for broadcasting, in some instances, rebroadcasting lies. How much is that ratings zeal, that fervor to keep the numbers as high as some of the other right-wing outlets? Does that have a legal significance, or does that just explain the motive to those of us reading it as a narrative?
Well, it makes it easier if the case does go to a jury rather than being resolved just summarily by the judge. It makes it easier for jurors, regardless of their politics, even if they initially believed the big lie. It makes it easier for them to say Dominion should win and Fox should have to be held accountable. But you don't have to prove motive. From time to time, people think, well, Fox didn't have an evil motive. They weren't politically motivated. That's not relevant. The idea that they were motivated by greed, that's no defense. It's neither here nor there. We know what their motive was. They wanted to have greater revenue. They wanted to please their audience. They were worried that they would lose audience share if they told people that what they hoped was true, namely that the election had been stolen. If they told people that that wasn't true, that they would turn off the channel, switch to another station, maybe listen to CNN or, God forbid, MSNBC. That was the motive, but it really doesn't matter. It's also odd that it is being argued by some people that unless Fox News itself endorsed all the lies, they can't be held liable. Well, number one, they came as close to endorsing all of these lies as anything I've ever seen. Number two, that isn't the standard. The New York Times itself, when it was sued in New York Times versus Sullivan, they just ran an NAACP ad that had some false statements. They didn't endorse it, but the U.S. Supreme Court said that they would be liable anyway for those false statements if they put them on the page knowing they were false or being reckless about it. In fact, all the debate in the country about Section 230, the section that protects certain internet companies from liability for what third parties say, there would be no such debate if the law were you can be held liable only if they are your own statements. On the contrary, the law is clear. If you provide a platform for things you know are lies, and that causes people harm, they collect damages. You know, if I were the judge, I, as I say, would really consider giving summary judgment to Dominion. And if I were a juror, even if I were a juror who loved Donald Trump, and even if I initially believed the big lie, it would be hard for me to listen to all this stuff and not vote for Dominion. And that's why I don't think if I were counsel for Dominion, I would be advising them to consider settling. This is a case where there is no reason to settle because there is no defense for Fox or Fox Corporation for that matter.
It is an unbelievable look inside Fox. And if you're on the outside, and especially for me, I've tried to figure out what was going on. You're right. The facts are so stark that if you had to bring a set of facts in a case like this to a jury, these are about the clearest ones you could present. Laurence Tribe, it's always a treat and a privilege to get to learn from you. Thank you for spending some time with us today.
Great.
We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. There's much more ahead.
Each week on Why Is This Happening?, MSNBC's Chris Hayes is joined by uniquely qualified guests to dig deeper into today's most pressing issues and ask, why is this happening? And fans are loving what they're hearing.
I love that Chris isn't afraid to not know the answer to the things he's asking about.
I've listened to so many that have made me cry and some that have, they make me laugh.
Whenever his wife, Kate, is on, because she's brilliant and he can't stop showing just how obsessed he is with her, and I love it.
I've received both of my vaccines plus my booster, but it's in fact the Chris Hayes shot in the arm I receive each week that I am convinced keeps my mind and body running smoothly.
I like to use WithPod as a zero-commitment book club.
Why Is This Happening? The Chris Hayes Podcast. New episodes every Tuesday. Subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts.
We're going to show our work here as a show. There's been a story developing as we've been on the air. In our breaks, we've been trying to learn as much as we can about it. Here's what it is. News has broken over the last 45 minutes out of New York City. 3 law enforcement sources telling NBC News that additional security measures are once again being put in place by the New York Police Department around that courthouse where Alvin Bragg's case has been heard by the grand jury investigating Donald Trump. It is at this hour unclear if prosecutors have made any decisions. We don't have that much information, frankly. If they've decided to move forward on charging the ex-president or not, we don't know. Sources stress that the stepped-up security is simply a precautionary measure. The grand jury was there today, though. They did meet, and they're expected to convene again Monday, possibly Wednesday. Tim Heaphy joins us. He's the former lead investigator for the January 6th Select Committee. New York Times congressional reporter Luke Broadwater also joins us. Obviously, we are all gathered to have a slightly different conversation, my friends, but as this story has been developing, we find ourselves together, again, asking big questions, unprecedented questions that you investigated, Tim, that you've covered, Luke, about the conduct of the last person to serve in the Oval Office, Donald J. Trump. And I wonder, Tim, as you see a year and a half of your life's work clearly cross the transom and become a body of evidence now being poured over by DOJ, as you see these other prosecutors looking at other pieces of the same person's conduct with Trump in New York, it's his financial hush money cover-up that is really under scrutiny, not the federal campaign finance violation that SDNY looked at. In Georgia, it's another part of what you probed. And I wonder your thoughts this afternoon, as it looks like in New York City, at least, safety and security of its citizens are top of mind.
Yeah, Nicolle, absolutely. Thanks for having me again. Look, they would not be putting up extra barricades and worrying about security, physical security, if they were not moving toward an indictment, right? This is yet another sign to me that an indictment is likely imminent, that they are braced for anger and potentially violence. And we've seen before many events that the president has stoked political violence and that some of his supporters may very well be moved to commit acts of violence. So I think we're getting closer and closer to accountability. We're getting closer and closer to criminal charges and from a number of different directions, all of the ones that you just mentioned. And I think that's justice. That's what our system does. He'll have an opportunity in court to challenge those allegations. But it looks to me like we're getting closer and closer to having that debate in a court of law.
Tim, what is it like to investigate someone who was so frontal and brazen? You know, the intimidation, mob-like doesn't get at it, right? Because mob-like intimidation is something different. It's insidious, it's physical. This is amplifying images of physical violence. Donald Trump reposted an image of physical violence being carried out against Alvin Bragg. It's going to Waco, a place that is so symbolic with the birth of militias, that is so tied to Donald Trump's own political rise with Roger Stone's ties to the Branch Davidians. It is intimidation on this national scale. As the leader of the Republican Party, what is it like to investigate somebody like that?
It's frightening, candidly, for anyone, but particularly for someone with that platform to continue to use incendiary rhetoric and incendiary images. And, Nicolle, importantly, it bears upon the crucial issue. You and I have talked about this on your show before. The crucial issue for the special counsel is intent.
Did he intend to disrupt the joint session? Did he even intend that there could be violence used? That would be evidence of guilt of seditious conspiracy. So the more he continues to glorify the political prisoners of January 6th, to defend them, to repeat these allegations of election fraud, that is continued evidence of his intent, all of which is drawing the close attention of the special counsel.
Let me ask you this question. Lots of times on this side of an investigation that is largely opaque, and the investigation you oversaw, it was a service that, because it was congressional in nature, it was more transparent than what we have had to cover when it comes to Trump in the past. But there's a sense that his criminal conduct happened in the past, and his reaction to it bears heavily and mightily on the prosecutors. There's no one for whom this conversation swirls more heavily than Merrick Garland, that his concerns about the optics of investigating an ex-president, the leader of a political party in his country that happens to be the opposite party of his boss, Joe Biden, weighs so heavily on him. But what if, as you're saying, the criminal behavior goes up to and includes the response to being under investigation? It seems that Mueller had a swing at this, and by not taking the obstruction cases and saying these are clear acts of crimes and they should be charged the day he leaves office, we were left with all this evidence of ongoing criminality and no consequence. Do you want to say anything, or do you want to help us think about the way Trump interferes with elections into him as they're leading up to this point?
Yeah, two things. It's notoriously difficult to prove someone's intent, to look inside the human mind. That's hard to do. You're relying upon circumstantial evidence. And a person's statements about what happened bear directly upon his intention during those events. So the more the president praises the rioters, talks about those incarcerated as political prisoners, that is direct evidence, circumstantial, but evidence of his state of mind. And the fact that this continues, that the rhetoric continues, is making, to me, and this is me, the former prosecutor speaking, an even more compelling case. The other thing I'd say, Nicolle, is that this is a case. There are times as a prosecutor when no matter what you decide, you know that there will be extreme criticism based on that decision. The sort of no-win cases. This is one of those for Merrick Garland. He knows that whichever decision is made, to pursue an indictment or to decline an indictment, he will be criticized by a large number of people in this country because they think that that will be the wrong decision. To me, that just sort of, I take him at his word when he says that just doesn't matter, that he will continue through this work of the special counsel, elevating to the attorney general, to make this decision on the facts and the law. The facts continue to get more compelling beyond what we found. He's going to have access to new information beyond privilege assertions, or people that refuse to come into the select committee are going to have to now go in front of the grand jury. I think all of that is going to make it an even stronger case than the one on which we based our criminal referrals. And accountability in this country has to matter. The law applies the same whether you're an accused drug seller on the streets of New York City or the former president of the United States. The same rules apply. And that principle, I think, is going to guide the attorney general and his team to the right decision.
I want to bring our viewers into the loop here because you brought us to the conversation we intended to have with you and Luke. But we came on the air with some breaking news out of New York City that the NYPD is sort of re-erecting, refortifying the area around which the grand jury investigating Donald Trump's alleged crimes around the payments to Stormy Daniels, where that grand jury has been meeting. We're going to turn now, though, to this story about the special counsel's work. And Tim Heaphy has done a great job previewing it. But we want to pull through to the top of this hour some of what we know now to be ahead for Jack Smith, new people that he'll get to talk to that will build on the extraordinary body of evidence that the January 6th Select Committee has already made public. As we already know from testimony provided to that Select Committee, Donald Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, was anywhere and everywhere all the time when it came to every tentacle leading into and out of January 6th, making him a gold mine of information for special counsel Jack Smith. It makes perfect sense that the ex-president doesn't want Meadows to testify before the grand jury, and he just took a big step to try to prevent it from ever happening. Trump is now appealing Judge Beryl Howell's ruling that was unsealed last week, which ordered Meadows, along with other top Trump aides, to not use executive privilege to avoid testifying in the special counsel's probe. Trump hasn't had success on this front of late in his fights over executive privilege. The Hill reports this, quote, the matter will come before the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, where a 3-judge panel recently upheld another of Judge Howell's decisions ordering Evan Corcoran, that's Trump's attorney in the Mar-a-Lago investigation, to cooperate with investigators and return before the grand jury to answer questions he had previously dodged, citing the attorney-client privilege. And just earlier this week, Judge Howell's successor, that's Judge Boasberg, denied a different Trump effort to use this executive privilege claim. He said that Mike Pence, former vice president, had to comply with his subpoena from the special counsel. Now, it comes to these fights, it looks like history is on the side of Jack Smith. NBC reports this, quote, legal experts say a criminal investigation usually supersedes executive privilege, as it did when the Supreme Court forced President Richard Nixon to hand over tapes of his Oval Office conversations. Luke, just on the historic nature of this volume of evidence amassed in an historically quick and effective and efficient and then well-produced and narrated way, now being supercharged, turbocharged by the kinds of witnesses that Tim really probably would have dreamed of having access to.
Right. Well, you can see that Donald Trump clearly does not want Mark Meadows, Dan Scavino, Mike Pence, other people to testify. The January 6th committee accumulated so much evidence, so many interviews, and laid out a voluminous case of criminal referrals to the Justice Department. But they did never hear from Mike Pence, from Mark Meadows, or Dan Scavino. And those are the very people who will have to testify if this judge's ruling stands. Now, it's under appeal right now, and it's a secretive process, but it does seem like, based on some of the past rulings, that these gentlemen will have to end up testifying. And if so, just as you said in your intro, Mark Meadows was in touch with basically everybody who had anything to do with January 6th. That's everyone in the White House. That's the rally organizers. That's the members of Congress. That's the protesters in some cases. And so he would have really insider knowledge of exactly what was happening at every step. And Dan Scavino was essentially, Trump's right-hand man, with him all the time, in charge of the social media. He knows exactly what Donald Trump is dictating to be tweeted out or what those discussions are like. And he never testified either before the January 6th committee. So it opens up a whole new well of evidence for the grand jury that the public and investigators have never heard.
So, Tim, you're E.F. Hutton. I know that when you talk, people listen. And I know Mark Meadows, Adam Kinzinger describes Mark Meadows as your star witness, even though he didn't come and almost got in legal trouble for not doing so. What would you have started with him? If he's sitting down with Jack Smith's investigators, what are they asking him?
Yeah, he is, as Luke said, in the middle of everything. He's the chief of staff, so he's involved in, from the election on, this Stop the Steal campaign, the discussions about election fraud, which ultimately, after litigation is unsuccessful and criminal investigators at the FBI and Justice look into them, do not bear fruit. He's then involved in the outreach to state legislators and state officials. He's involved very directly in the possible personnel change at the Department of Justice. He's involved in pressure on the vice president. And then he's there all day with the president at the Ellipse and in the White House on January 6th. We would obviously want to walk him through that important chronology. And his direct communications with the president would bear directly upon, we keep coming back to it, that crucial issue of intent. But Nicolle, look, importantly, we talked to people all around Mark Meadows, people who were in the room when it happened, right? He didn't talk to us, but his principal deputy did. Several of them did.
Yeah.
Pat Cipollone, who was in those rooms, the White House counsel, shared with us what happened. My expectation is that what Jack Smith will get will be a direct account from Mark Meadows, if he's truthful and doesn't assert a Fifth Amendment privilege, which he could do, a direct account of what we have heard from the other people who were present. I don't expect bombshells or new information. I don't expect things that are exculpatory. I think it'll be more of the same because, again, we worked around that hole that Mark Meadows created by his lack of presence by talking to lots of people who were around him.
And you had his text messages. So you had half the conversation. Well, you have both of them. I mean, you have both sides of the text messages. Let me ask you this about Meadows. He has a real lawyer. Not everybody in Trump world can say that. Do you think George Terwilliger is working out some limited immunity for Meadows before he sits down? Because it seems that if you're looking at a conspiracy, he could have legal exposure on the obstruction of official proceeding, on insurrection, on false statements.
I don't know. That would not be unprecedented if a good, reasonable defense lawyer were to look at exposure and has very important information that a prosecutor could use to build a case against an arguably more culpable target. It would be a bargain for exchange, immunity in exchange for truthful testimony. That could be going on, Nicolle. I don't know if it is or not. I do think there's a chance that Meadows will continue to resist by now, if forced to go under oath, asserting a Fifth Amendment privilege. And then that's calling the DOJ's bluff. That is him saying, I'm not going to answer your questions because I have exposure. And then the question is, will he be included in an indictment?
And what would that look like? A conspiracy that includes John Eastman and people like that?
Yeah, look, the department, it's important to keep in mind that the department is not just looking at the most culpable proximate actor here. They're looking at others with whom he conspired to obstruct, interfere with, or impede an official proceeding. That could be lawyers. That could be John Eastman, Rudy Giuliani, others. It could be members of Congress or state officials, or it could be other White House staff like Mark Meadows. I'm not sure how far that net will extend, but it's important to see this as a conspiracy, not just a single actor potential case.
You know, Luke, I asked you this question earlier in the week, and I'll just read this reporting from Talking Points memo. Mark Meadows exchanged text messages with at least 34 Republican members of Congress as they plotted to overturn Trump's loss in the 2020 election. Based on TPM's analysis, Meadows received at least 364 messages from Republican members of Congress who discussed attempts to reverse the election results with him. He sent 95 messages of his own. There are a ton of Republican members of Congress who were so concerned about what they did in that window. We don't know if it refers specifically to the text, but they were so concerned about their own conduct that they called or visited the White House and asked for presidential pardons. That was a big pillar of some of the evidence that the Select Committee presented. You said early in the week there's no indication that any of them are sweating any of this. Do you think that could change?
Yeah, I don't know. We do know that these text messages are now in the hands of the Justice Department. The evidence from the January 6th committee has been turned over. And so they, I'm sure, are going through them right now and looking at them. From my reporting on the Hill, none of the congressional Republicans have been told that they are under investigation or believe they are. That said, they're doing everything they can to try to support Donald Trump, who they believe is under investigation, and do whatever they can to loudly defend him or try to interfere or intervene in various investigations against him. So they're viewing themselves right now as sort of a defense system or a bulwark against a prosecution of Donald Trump. I haven't heard a ton of worry from the House Republicans to date. Obviously, there's been this fight over Scott Perry's phone. He's the head of the Freedom Caucus. His phone was seized by federal investigators, but he was told that investigation is into Jeffrey Clark and not into him, and that he is a witness in that investigation. So, I could see there being some uneasiness, but right now they're pretty much in attack mode and not on the defense.
Tim, as a former prosecutor with that hat on, would you presume that the special counsel may be pursuing Trump's White House and cabinet inner circle first?
Yeah, again, Nicolle, this comes down to who was aware of the sort of falsity of the election fraud allegations or the lack of veracity of the legal argument of the vice president's authority. There's lots of evidence that the president himself was repeatedly told that there's no evidence of election fraud, yet continued to repeat. So that's direct evidence of intent. I'm not sure if that evidence is as strong in terms of the members of Congress or other co-conspirators in terms of their understanding. So I don't, again, none of them cooperated with us. We didn't have very much success getting into sort of the inner workings of discussions with members of Congress beyond the Meadows texts, which he provided to us, which, as Luke said, show ample communication between the White House and certain members of Congress. So I don't know if that evidence exists. The focus really is on who is lying, who is misleading, who is putting forth a strategy that is based mindfully, knowingly, specifically intending to be based on falsity. That'll be their question. And I don't know if that extends to members of Congress.
So a lot of that, go ahead, Luke.
Oh, sure. I mean, they certainly should have known that the things they were saying was false. I mean, there was ample evidence that they that had been presented. They had lost court case after court case, and if they had been paying attention or reading the news in any way, they would have known that the wild claims of election fraud were in fact false. But I guess without questioning under oath and detailed depositions, you're not going to get them in a place where you can really know for certain exactly when they knew certain things were false and whether they kept saying them anyway. So I think that's the investigative step that has not been taken yet by anybody.
I mean, but Tim, don't you say, so when were you reelected, Jim Jordan? What was the date? What was the ballot? Do you have a copy of any of the ballots used in your district? Do you think that was real? I mean, the insanity, the stupidity, the inane nature of this entire conversation, and I'll take complete responsibility for it, is every House member is there because they believe in the integrity of the November election of 2020. None of them said, I'm not going to take my seat because I think the election was screwed up. They all accepted the results on the line that had member of Congress, and they all presumably rejected the line in which voters in their own congressional districts chose a president. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Curiously, the only allegations of election fraud were in the states that the president lost, right? Every other state was results on which we can rely. Yeah, it doesn't make rational sense. It never made rational sense, and it was never based on fact. That's what we keep coming back to. This plot, this multi-part plan to subvert democracy and interrupt the transfer of power was built on deception, misinformation that was fed to the rioters at the Capitol affirmatively by the former president and other co-conspirators. It doesn't make rational sense. We could spend hours, Nicolle, going back and forth because there is no there. And that is what is so shocking. The fact that so many people believed it and so many people continue to believe it is shocking.
I want to ask you a couple other questions, Tim, while I have you, about what witnesses who we don't talk about quite as much, but we know from the evidence that you presented in the public hearings that people like Donald Trump's national security advisor, Mr. O'Brien, communicated and knew on January 4th, 2 days before the deadly insurrection, that, quote, violence at the Hill was possible. How much is premeditation something that you can establish? You also have John Ratcliffe was someone that didn't want anything to do with the post-election period because it was dangerous. What? The country's head of national intelligence knew that Trump was dangerous or that what he was doing was dangerous, didn't want anything to do with it. The national security advisor knew 48 hours ahead of time, 2 days ahead of time, that there was going to be violence on the Hill. What can Jack Smith do if he's able to pierce executive privilege and find out everything that led them to say the things they said to you?
Yeah. So we interviewed Robert O'Brien at length. We spent 5 or 6 hours with him. We did not interview John Ratcliffe. And Robert O'Brien was forthcoming to us, but for assertions of executive privilege with respect to direct communications with the president, right? And a lot of witnesses drew this line. Pat Cipollone is another good example. Mark Short and Greg Jacob. When it came to recounting for us direct communications that they or Vice President Pence had with the president, they claimed executive privilege. Jack Smith is going to be able to push through that. It sounds like there's already been litigation, and the chief judge of the district court in Washington has said the need in a criminal investigation for relevant information outweighs, supersedes, is more important than an assertion of executive privilege. So I think those witnesses, rather than just telling us what happened before the conversation with the president and what happened after, and their personal view about whether there was or wasn't election fraud or whether the vice president had this authority, will now then have to say, here's what I told the president, and here's what he said back to me. It's a direct evidence of his understanding of facts, of the law, that is really important to the special counsel's inquiry. So John Ratcliffe, Robert O'Brien, Mike Pence himself, and some of the witnesses who we talked to, but for that missing piece of the direct communications, are going to provide more information to the grand jury, and that'll be crucial, important information. I think it's all going to corroborate essentially what we already know, that this was intentional, and the president was aware that there was no evidence of election fraud, or and knew that the vice president did not have the constitutional authority to do what the president was asking him to do. But the direct evidence will be really important, and the special counsel is going to get that.
Part of the direct evidence is simple. These are about conflicts about what was protected, but some of it is just Donald Trump's knowledge that he'd lost. A lot of the witnesses that you presented were campaign officials who went face to face and told him he lost. There's something in Mark Milley's transcript that was released at the conclusion where he has a conversation with Trump who's acutely aware of his defeat, and they're talking about, I think, foreign policy as it pertains to Iran. Would it be a fair assumption to assume that people like Mark Milley have been presented to a grand jury to say, yeah, Trump knew he lost? We talked about how we would, what the final disposition for the incoming administration would be about XYZ foreign policy?
Potentially, sure. The grand jury doesn't have to hear from everyone directly. They could get, if it's just a small piece like that, that could be recounted to them by another witness, by an agent, for example. The grand jury can rely upon secondhand hearsay in making its determination. What you're referring to, I remember this when it happened in the interview with General Milley. He said that they were discussing some foreign policy issue in the Oval Office, and the president said, well, we don't have to worry about that. It's going to go to the next guy. This was after the election, sort of acknowledging that this thorny foreign policy issue, he didn't need to resolve because it was going to go to President Biden. And there are several moments. Alyssa Farah tells the story of being in the dining room alone with the president, and he's looking at the TV, and then President-elect Biden comes on and he goes, can you believe I lost to this effing guy? Right? Again, there were moments when the president acknowledged to others who I presume have provided this information to the special counsel, being mindful of his loss. Again, all of that bears upon his subsequent conduct and his evidence that he was misleading America by continuing to repeat those falsehoods.
And those are incriminating in terms of specifically two of the crimes that the committee referred, the false statements and the fraud and the obstruction of official. I mean, that seems to go to his criminality in a way that we don't talk at as much because there isn't a legal battle. There isn't something that bursts into public view. But it all is incriminating, right? Yes,
it all very directly. Again, when you're trying to dive inside of someone's mind and divine intent, their statements and what they say and when they say them matter. And post-election statements of acknowledgement of loss bear directly upon intent.
Luke, I want to give you the last word in terms of this reporting as it continues to be sort of about something that was so sort of groundbreaking, if you will, in Congress. I mean, we watched Jim Jordan fumble and mumble and frankly embarrass himself and his Republican majority. What they're trying at some level to emulate is the success of the 1-6 Select Committee. What are the ripples that are still left behind from this body of work and what's now much more opaque at DOJ?
Yeah, I mean, January 6th rocked Congress and it rocked the country, but it seems, the parties really diverged after the first month or so when there was sort of unanimity about how terrible it was. And, now we've seen what Republicans are trying to do now is do some rewriting of history. And one of the things they're trying to do is run their committees in a way that were as effective as the way the January 6th committee did. But it's going to be almost impossible to replicate. One of the big mistakes that they made, and I think most of them would acknowledge it in retrospect, is by boycotting the January 6th committee, they have they took themselves out of the game, so to speak. And so they could not interrupt the proceedings or do cross-examinations of witnesses live on television or anything like that. And so now as they're trying to run their own investigative hearings, you can see Democrats crossing the witnesses when they have the chance to do so, or making their point of view known. And it's just not having, to date, the same success that the January 6th committee did. And frankly, they haven't even come close to any of the investigative steps. The number of witnesses brought in, over 1,000 witnesses, all the documents that were accumulated. So, it's nowhere close to the success of the January 6th committee.
And look, I think that's a compliment to the product, Tim, that you and your colleagues and the members created. But it's also a sad commentary on the bad faith with which the Republicans are going about doing what they're doing. And I just wonder what you make of the fact that a vacuum now exists. Jack Smith is clearly pursuing these investigations with some vigor. That is a true statement from what is outward facing. We don't know what that will result in. But it is also true that while you were doing your probe in Congress, Jack Smith hadn't been appointed yet. And there's no indication public facing, I will acknowledge, that Merrick Garland had any appetite to dive into the facts. As you just said, there's copious evidence, even without these executive privilege secret legal battles, to free up these kinds of witnesses. There's stuff in the transcripts that proves that Donald Trump knew he lost, which proves that everything he was saying was false. You can get at two of the referred crimes, frankly, with the mountain of evidence that you already compiled. Why wasn't that pursued? Do you have any more clarity on that in the first 18 months after January 6th occurred?
Yeah, let me just say, look, the committee is only as good as the facts with which it had to work, right? Lawyers are not alchemists. Lawyers present facts. And the reason that the select committee, I think, is perceived as having been successful is because the facts were compelling, right? So I think we accessed them and put them together in a compelling report and in our findings. But to be clear, what makes lawyers successful, what makes investigations successful is the quality of the evidence that is uncovered. And I think, back to Luke's point, some of the things that we have seen attempts to emulate or other investigations don't have the facts. They don't have the compelling body of evidence to present that we had. Now, whether the department was too slow or not, I do believe that we had to blaze a bit of a trail for them. I do think they were focused almost exclusively at first on the blue-collar part of the case. We've talked about this before. Thousands or hundreds of people charged with storming the Capitol, and they weren't sufficiently focused on the white-collar part of the case, the sort of, the political coup. But they got there, whether it was because they learned about it from our investigation or from our hearings. They got there. They're there now, and they're pursuing it now. And they're being thorough, and they're being careful.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but someone else has gotten there. WNBC is reporting that the grand jury is voting on the Trump case in Manhattan right now. 22 minutes ago, the three of us convened, and we talked about security being ramped up is apparently for a reason. The New York Times has also just moved a story on this with 3 bylines. Let me read to you from this breaking news. The unprecedented case against Trump will have wide-ranging implications. Manhattan grand jury voted to indict Donald J. Trump on Thursday for his role in paying hush money to a porn star. That's according to 4 people with knowledge of the matter. An historic development that will shake up the 2024 presidential race and forever mark him as the nation's first former president to face criminal charges. I'm going to continue reading from the New York Times story on this breaking news. The felony indictment filed under seal by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office will likely be announced in the coming days. By then, prosecutors working for the district attorney, Alvin Bragg, will have asked Trump to surrender and to face arraignment on charges that remain unknown for now. Luke, we've had your colleagues on earlier in the broadcast today talking about Donald Trump's projection and constant talk about prosecuting enemies, about using investigations in a political manner. The opposite has been true for Alvin Bragg's office. He has been a reluctant pursuer of these facts. It is the topic of a book by Mark Pomerantz, who was an investigator detailed to the Trump cases by Bragg's predecessor, Cy Vance. The Southern District of New York investigated these facts and interviewed these witnesses and arrived at the conclusion that Donald Trump had, quote, directed and coordinated a hush money scheme. Alvin Bragg has picked up this case with some vigor. And today, I'll read from the Times again, quote, a Manhattan grand jury voted to indict Donald Trump on Thursday for his role in paying hush money to a porn star.
Well, it's historic news. He's the first ex-president ever to be indicted. It shows that the district attorney was not intimidated by the threats of death and destruction against him, by the attempts at congressional interference, by the threats of protests, of massive protests against him, and he went forward with the case. And, this is a breaking story. There's going to be a lot of fallout. But, how this impacts the presidential election, what kind of jail time or charges exactly Donald Trump is looking at. There's going to be so much developing. And I'm going to be, right after this, rushing around Capitol Hill to see if there's anyone there to give live reaction.
And if you need to jump, I certainly respect your priorities or to your paper, and you need to do that, you go do that. Tim, let me just share with you something that was shared with me, that because Bragg's office doesn't have the federal campaign finance violations as a code or a law or something that they enforce, this is largely about the cover-up, which took place while Donald Trump was president. This is in 2017. Again, it's been chronicled by some of the witnesses who've been very vocal critics of Donald Trump, people like Michael Cohen, also people who've investigated this, that this is likely as much about the cover-up as what will surely be dismissed as a tawdry sex scandal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know much about the specific charges. I guess none of us do until we see the indictment. But you're right. It sounds to me, Nicolle, this is just based on what I've read. This was distinct from the work of the committee, that this is about the cover-up, that this was essentially a campaign benefit that should have been reported as a contribution that was not. So it's not about the payment as much, it's the lack of accounting or accurate accounting or reporting of the payment. But it is a pattern of dishonesty. It's a pattern of not telling the truth. To the extent there's a theme that runs through these cases, it's that, right? It's lying, it's deception. That's the thread that seems to tie all these cases together.
And because it's Trump, it's something that ties together his political persona and now, as Luke just said, his historic brand, if you will, is the first ever indicted, criminally charged former president of this country. Let's bring in former U.S. Attorney and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Harry Litman. Harry, we've talked a lot about what Alvin Bragg has been pursuing based on the witnesses that we know about that have come in and out. The historic news, again, reported by the journalists Ben Protest, Jonah Bromwich, and William Rashbon of the New York Times that says this, quote, a Manhattan grand jury voted to indict Donald Trump on Thursday for his role in paying hush money to a porn star. It's according to 4 people with knowledge of the matter. They describe it as an historic development that will shake up the 2024 presidential race and forever mark him as the nation's first former president to face criminal charges. Your initial reaction?
Yeah, it is surely that. So, I mean, we've been, anticipating some such event for a few years, and here it finally comes. It's now going to be the new normal, Nicolle. That is, we now are looking ahead at all kinds of litigation and pretrial challenges. Trump has apparently committed himself to a kind of vitriolic, nasty prosecution bashing. I think it's very interesting. Bragg impressively held his own counsel here. The table was completely set once they invited Trump to testify, and we were wondering what would happen after that. So we had Costello, whom Trump asked to the grand jury to hear, and then they didn't even call Michael Cohen back. I think they were confident that he hadn't really laid a glove on him, but they did call David Pecker back. So I'm very eager to see, the headline is the headline, but what exactly is he charging? And I think Pecker's presence there suggests that this is a whole kind of very Trumpian scheme incorporating Karen McDougal that basically originated a little earlier in the campaign when they knew people might be coming out of the woodwork, and they made a deal, a criminal conspiracy to catch and kill that was, in fact, probably illegal in tax that gives rise to tax violations, financial fraud, and the like. That's the thing we'll want to look at. But Bragg, kept quiet as everything was swirling around him, and he knew that this was coming. It's an impressive end game, I think, on his part.
A legal endgame, a story for our country that is very much just beginning. Let me add to our conversation the counsel of Andrew Weissmann. Andrew Weissmann, Tim Heaphy just described a pattern of dishonest behavior on the part of Donald Trump, which, again, as a political statement is the understatement of a century. But I think people who've watched Trump and seen him as sort of a legal Houdini feel that the dishonest behavior has crossed into criminality. And I wonder if you can flesh out for us what, and again, let me just, again, be right on the news. NBC News is now also able to report that a Manhattan grand jury has voted to indict Donald Trump. The New York Times was first to report the Manhattan grand jury voted to indict Donald Trump today. We have not seen the charges, but we have seen the witnesses that have come in and out in these final days and weeks. And in addition to Michael Cohen, who's been very public on his way in and out, there have been some other witnesses that we haven't known as much about. And based on the folks that were in there last, what do you believe this indictment will say and read?
Well, Nicolle, obviously this is a monumental, historic importance. I think that we will see at least one, if not more, felony charges against the former president. And we will see, for those people like myself who have been waiting for a long time to see the first step in terms of legal accountability, this is that first step. I do want to say that it is really important to remember, if this reporting is accurate, which all accounts would be that it is, it makes total sense that this would be happening, that one, we are likely to see, I think, other charges in other jurisdictions. Remember, this, by all accounts, is not the most serious thing that's under investigation. And I think it actually can assist other DAs and federal prosecutors in taking the bold step that they need to vindicate the rule of law. And the other thing that I think it's very important for people to remember, that at this point, if Donald Trump is now in a case as a criminal defendant, it is important to remember that he is presumed innocent. And there's, it's fine for us to talk about proof and all of the things, and that's totally responsible. But in a court of law, he is going to be presumed innocent as opposed to the court of public opinion. And there will be a lot of process that he is given, which is also part of our American system of justice. So there won't be a trial anytime soon. But that is something that should be respected, even though people will be anxious to see that happen. I think people should, who wanted to see the stay calm, just need to understand that's part of the American rule of law, is that defendants are accorded substantial rights, as they should be, in facing those charges and bringing the case to a jury. That's not to take anything away from the incredibly important step that we are seeing today, with the first time that an American president has faced criminal charges. And we join the rest of the world where this is not unusual to see people such as the current head of Israel, who is currently under indictment, where people obey the rule of law. And it's nice to see that America is joining the rest of the community, that we have political leaders who are not above the law and will be held to account in our criminal justice system.
some very wise. Please.
So this is what I meant, Andrew, of course, point is well taken, but it's what I meant by the new normal. This is a breathtaking, monumental event, as he says, but we are really have to be thinking about now the new horizon, because there likely will be other charges, and at any given time, there's going to be skirmishes in court up to a year or more, and they will be sort of cross-cutting, and Trump will, if all indications are as they've been, having a kind of slashing, burning, contemptuous defense, both in the public sphere and in court. And so we're just going to have a whole kind of brew of legal and political drama that people will be following, and it will be the Fulton County case, maybe the Jack Smith case, and it's just going to be sort of weighed down with things that are freighted, even if they're what would normally be conventional litigation kinds of pretrial motions. They'll have the impact of the political kind of battle that Trump will be waging with tremendous sort of vigor and contempt.
Is Tim Heaphy still with us? I was like that house guest that showed up early and stayed late. I kept him so long. Is Tim still here? Tim, I just want to I want to root all this, though, in someone that's been there before, because I think that we have to also guard around the other side of this coin, which is he's going to be so scary now that he's been indicted. He's been scary the whole time. And he came after you and your committee chair and your committee vice chair. Before that, he came after Andrew Weissmann and Robert Mueller. Before that, he went after Andrew McCabe and Jim Comey. And I just wonder if you have anything from sort of sitting in that pocket of following the facts, following the law, ending up in 4 criminal referrals for the U.S. Department of Justice, if you have anything sort of from the other side of that experience to share with us today.
Look, so much of what happened on January 6th was based on a lack of faith that people have in government, a lack of faith that people have in criminal justice. There's so many people there that believed that the election was stolen, that they were patriots that were rescuing democracy. Part of the way we get that back, we show people that our systems are durable, that democracy works, is to have accountability, is to have the system actually work, right? To me, when the facts and the law compel an indictment and there is accountability, that has the potential to be a restoration of faith in the system. And at bottom in this country, I think what we're unfortunately dealing with is a division between those that believe in systems, believe in government, believe in media, believe in science, believe in things on which you and I might rely for truth, and people that don't. And this might be a step. Some people aren't going to accept it, but it might be a way for some people to have restored faith that our system actually works. If it can hold former president accountable, then that's evidence that the system can, in fact, work.
There's one standard of justice. Tim Heaphy, thank you so much. I know we made you come on early and we kept you late, but we are so grateful to have you on an historic day like today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicolle.
Andrew, I want to come back to what Tim just said, because I think it's something I've struggled with very publicly, and I've talked to you about on and off the air. This sense, and Mark Pomerantz writes about it in his book, that to pursue the facts and then do nothing is in effect creating 2 standards, one for Trump and the powerful, although I can't think of many people who've been more of a legal Houdini than Donald J. Trump, and one for the rest of us. And I wonder in that context, the importance of Alvin Bragg's careful and deliberate pursuit of the facts in this case.
Well, I think about exactly that in terms of my own personal experience. We were I have to now say, I can't just say in the special counsel's office because we have so many, in special counsel Mueller's office. We looked for 22 months. We wrote a report, and the second part of that report developed substantial evidence of obstruction of justice because of the Department of Justice policy of not indicting a sitting president. Nothing could be done by us at that time. We then watched the Attorney General Barr, completely mislead the American public about the report and distort it. We also then watched the current administration just look forward, not backwards, even though there was substantial evidence of obstruction of justice by the former president. I was always sort of appalled that that wouldn't be vindicated, because there's no point in appointing the next special counsel if you're going to allow obstruction of that special counsel. So now we're in a situation where Donald Trump is no longer the president, and he, like anyone else, can face charges for criminal conduct that he committed before he was president, while he was president, and after he was president. And it's important to note that he appears to have been indicted for his conduct before he was president, but we're seeing cases that deal with his conduct while he was president and conduct after he was president in connection with Georgia, the January 6th investigation, and his conduct at Mar-a-Lago. And so this is the period before he was president in anticipation of his becoming president. And we're seeing this first historic indictment. And as somebody who lived through a time seeing strong evidence of obstruction of justice that was not vindicated, there's a real satisfaction in seeing this first step to hold people, no matter what their station, to the rule of law. I think it's also worth noting, as you did, Nicolle, that this is a DA who did not bring the charges a year ago and said he thought they were not ready. And so he is not somebody who is sort of quick to pull a trigger until he feels that the case is really ready to bring, and that's commendable.
I want to just put one thing out there and see if it's possible that what Bragg has put before the grand jury through witness testimony extends beyond this period when he was a candidate. It's been suggested to me that the false documents and the falsifying business records was something that was ongoing into 2017 when Donald Trump was president, that he was writing checks from inside the Oval Office. And if we're looking at a cover-up, it's possible it could include some of that period, right, Andrew?
Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. That is absolutely right. That this started, but that's a complete fair correction to what I just said. Absolutely.
No, not a correction. Just broadening the conduct as we've all become experts here. I want to bring in another friend to this conversation. Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney, now law professor at the University of Alabama and MSNBC legal analyst. We've relied on you and on Andrew and on Harry to talk us through, as a country, watching someone who seems so brazenly to flout all of not just the norms of our politics, but the laws of our land. This started with a federal campaign finance investigation out of SDNY. It's in black and white in their sentencing memo for Michael Cohen, what that office found Donald Trump to have done. It was directing and coordinating a hush money scheme. These charges are likely based around the same period of time. As Andrew said, it started when he was a candidate, but they go beyond that. Can you talk about what crimes were likely under scrutiny by Bragg's office in this period where we know that a grand jury has voted to indict him, but we have not yet seen it because it is still sealed?
So I think you've gone straight to the heart of the matter, Nicolle, which is that because the charges under seal remain under seal, we don't know precisely what they are. But I think it's fair to contemplate that they may go well beyond what we've been expecting, which is a false business records charge. The New York Times is reporting that the sealed indictment has felony charges. So that dispenses with the first question, because that central core charge that we've all been talking about can be a misdemeanor or a felony. Assuming that that reporting is accurate, which seems like a very good thing to assume, we're now looking at a felony falsified records charge. But there could be more. As you and Andrew have just discussed, it's possible that there could be tentacles that would reach into the presidency, including a cover-up. We haven't talked a lot about conspiracy charges in this regard, but where more than one person is involved, conspiracy is often a companion charge, and conspiracies run through the last act of a cover-up. So that could be sort of an extensive issue and a way around the pesky statute of limitations, the legal issue that we've discussed over time, whether or not prosecutors have brought these charges within time. Certainly something that we can be confident about is that Alvin Bragg, a very experienced prosecutor who worked in the Southern District of New York and in the state attorney general's office before he became the district attorney, has had the foresight to do two things. One is to thoroughly vet any charges that he's bringing for both factual and legal issues. And the second is that he will have read the New York Criminal Code expansively. So if there are additional charges, whether they involve election fraud, whether they involve financial fraud involved in Michael Cohen obtaining the loan that was used to pay Stormy Daniels, there's an entire range of charges and also potentially other situations beyond the Stormy Daniels situation herself. So I think that we'll have to wait, which is never a very satisfying answer. But I think also we can have confidence about what this says for our democratic institutions. Ultimately, we begin to learn the answer that they are strong enough to take on even the former president.
Someone who has been central to the story that we've tried to bring to our viewers and the story that was brought to this grand jury is Michael Cohen. He joins us by phone. Michael, your first reaction?
My first reaction is I wish that people would have taken a few moments and not jumped the gun the way that we've been watching the media, many of the talking heads, worrying about what's happening in a month from now and tomorrow. I think we all need to just, as I had put out in my statement, today's indictment is not the end of the chapter, right? It's just rather the beginning. And now that the charges have been filed, it's better for the case to let the indictment speak for itself. But there are two things that I want to say. One is that accountability matters, something, Nicolle, you and I have talked about on virtually every appearance that I've been on your show, and that I stand by my testimony and the evidence that I provided to the District Attorney of New York. So Alvin Bragg, first and foremost, should receive at least some acknowledgement for doing the great job that they have done. But more important than even that, it's extremely important that we let the process work out and that people do still understand that there is a presumption of innocence in this country. And while the indictment is significant in the fact that it's the first time ever that a United States president, former or past, has been indicted, there is still the presumption of innocence in this country.
Michael, I understand you're not going to tell us, but do you know what Trump has been charged with?
You're right. I won't discuss it, even if I did know, because again,
you don't have to tell me, but do you know?
We do have to allow the indictment to speak for itself. I'm certain that those pages will be released in short order. You know that the former guy can't help himself, so I'm pretty sure that it'll end up on his Untruth Social somewhere, and then we'll have something much more. We'll have more to talk about. How's that?
Let me ask you this. One of the things that Andrew Weissmann and I have been talking about since this news broke this hour is that the time period of conduct under scrutiny by Alvin Bragg's office goes beyond the conducts and the payments to Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels as a candidate. They go to the cover-up, which is what Joyce and Harry and Andrew are all talking about. Can you confirm that that's the case, that was also a period that you shared?
Nicolle. Yeah, Nicolle, I'm so sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you. It's that I really don't. This is an ongoing case by a truly spectacular group of prosecutors and led by Alvin Bragg. I think right now we just take a step back, acknowledge that the first time in United States history that a former president has been held accountable and a formal indictment has been charged. But more importantly than that is that it shows that the rule of law, that justice still exists in this country and that accountability really matters.
One of the first indications we had, Michael, was that security measures were being taken down by the courthouse. Are you taking any extra security measures because of your high profile in this case?
I'd rather, again, sort of not get into that. I certainly don't want to put anybody on notice of what I am or I'm not doing, right? Look, there's going to be...
Well, let's take you out of it. Let's take you out of it and just talk about the security that the city of New York has deemed necessary. The city of New York, and specifically the New York Department of Police, NYPD, has deemed it necessary to fortify the area around the courthouse. You've written extensively, and we've talked a lot about what Trump incites, not just on January 6th, but in his movement in general. Having, once been in that inner circle, what do you want to sort of gird the country for from him?
Well, look, one of the things that Donald is very successful in doing is creating a storm, right? He said it in his own rally the other day. There's going to be repercussions. Well, I promise you one thing, being a lifelong New Yorker and knowing many, many NYPD officers, New York is not the place that you want to be stupid. Because the New York Police Department, as far as I'm concerned, is the best in the world. Not even just the country. They're the best in the world. So any silliness like what took place, or any, I should say, stupidity that Trump is going to try to incite here in New York, it's not going to go over well for any of them, especially not as it relates to law enforcement here in New York.
Michael, who's more pissed right now, Melania or Donald?
Definitively Donald. In fact, she's not the one that's potentially looking at, incarceration as well as having to defend this. She's just probably going on with whatever it is that she does each and every day.
What can you say about the toll this whole process has taken on you? I know up to and including, the most recent news cycle is your credibility, which has been tested by prosecutors in SDNY, in the Mueller probe, in Alvin Bragg's office, before that, Vance's office. It always comes up. I know it bothers you a lot. What has this whole process been like for you?
So how about all of these genius pundits going on there talking about my credibility, from like the Danny Savalos to the Eli Honigs to the Tara, Paula Reeds. And so everybody wants to attack Michael Cohen's credibility. Well, guess what? If you look to see what Attorney General Tish James said, she credited me for the investigation. And now, you know what? All of the, once again, lies, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation that they are throwing against me will ultimately continue to prove that everything, that what I had provided was relevant to this investigation and significant in the decision to ultimately hold the former president accountable. So more documents, more information will ultimately come out that's going to corroborate a lot of the things that I have said, especially that exists in my book, Revenge. That is an entire book that outlines the corrupt Department of Justice from up top, from Donald to Bill Barr, all the way down to like an Enid Stevens and the lowest of the low, this Adam Pakula and everybody in between, in terms of violating not only my constitutional rights, because I wanted to, put out my first book, Disloyal, but everything from the very, very beginning. When we see people like Jeffrey Berman in his own book foolishly acknowledging that he was being pressured by Main Justice to do what? To go after Michael Cohen. And you'll find that there, as I've said 1,000 times, there was no tax evasion. I've never tax evaded. I've never been audited in my life, right? And there was no HELOC violation. That's nonsense. And people have to understand, I didn't take out the HELOC for the purpose of this. That I already had. I had the HELOC on properties for almost 20 years. So, look, a lot of the things that they get clickbaits on and the attacks on me, it's draining. And, you know, it was very hard for me to stay focused and willing to participate, you know, in this with the DA. I mean, 23 times I have met with the district attorney's office. All I can say is this is an important day for America, and it's a very important day for the Department of, you know, for justice and also for accountability.
Michael, don't go anywhere. It is just after 6 p.m. in the East. We are encroaching into Ari Melber's hour. Ari, I want to bring you in. We are covering the breaking news with Michael Cohen, Andrew Weissmann, Joyce, Vance, and Harry Litman that the Manhattan grand jury has voted to indict Donald J. Trump.
It was a pitch-black night in the high desert. Sheriff's Deputy Billy Cox drove over the park and ride in Palmdale. Something very wrong around that bright blue Mustang. A woman's left leg and bare foot were hanging out of the door. L.A. County Homicide Detective Richard Longshore was sound asleep when he got the call.
There are cases that you will take home with you at night, and that will last till the end of your life.
I'm Keith Morrison, and this is The Girl in the Blue Mustang, a podcast from Dateline.
Listen now for free wherever you get your podcasts.
This is a day that many people, as you know, Nicolle, thought might not come based on the past probes. We're hearing breaking news. If Michael can hear me, I guess the question I would throw into the mix is, Michael, what do you think Donald Trump is going to face when he goes through the booking process? And do you think he is prepared for it?
The answer to that, hey, how are you, Ari? Look, I've been on your show at least a couple dozen times talking about this. I always believed that this day was going to come. I also predicted that Alvin Bragg would be the first. All of, again, these talking heads that want to tell you that this case is the weakest of them all. Why are we comparing one versus the other? Accountability isn't supposed to be, you know, whether it's you think January 6th is more relevant than campaign finance or this, you know, the various different things that they're looking at. I believe that Donald right now is petrified. This is one of his biggest fears, that he would be called out for who and what he truly is. The mugshotting is going to be something that is going to really upset his fragile ego. And at the end of the day, he's going to understand that no one is above the law, something that so many Democrats have actually stated over, you know, the course of many years now.
For those joining us, Michael Cohen, who has been called a key or star witness in this case, is on the line. We'll hear about 6 p.m. Eastern. This is The Beat with Ari Melber. Donald Trump, according to the New York Times, 4 sources, has been indicted under seal by the New York grand jury. Donald Trump's lawyers confirmed they've been notified of this. Michael, again, we're just on this toss, so if you could still hear me, the other question before we let you go that I have is, what do you think now that this indictment exists under seal? What do you think is the strength of the evidence and what the Times reports is a felony indictment that relates, at least in part, to some of the materials and evidence you've provided? What's the strength of the evidence now?
Well, I'm going to stay consistent with my comments when I was, again, with you on your show. The documents speak for themselves, and the documents are not beneficial to Donald Trump. Plain and simple. They are factual. They are a true and accurate accounting of everything that transpired, which, again, is like one of the reasons it's been so emotionally disheartening when your credibility is constantly under attack and people refuse to finish the sentence. What I did at the direction of, for the benefit of, and in cooperation with Donald J. Trump. And so I ended up being forced to plead guilty. I was charged, I was fined, and I was ultimately sentenced to several of these things that, they're looking at with Donald. What's good for one has to be good for all, because at the end of the day, there's only one system, not two. Everybody's supposed to be treated equally in the eyes of the law.
Yeah. No, and as you remind us, because you've spoken out publicly, you've participated as a cooperating witness here, and you've spoken out here tonight as the news breaks, Michael. This is a question of whether the law will be applied. This is a day, as I mentioned, many people thought might not have come. It certainly in New York came because of your testimony and the materials and information you provided, which is now a part of history. So I want to thank Michael Cohen, who joined my colleague Nicolle and helped us kick off this episode of The Beat. On a historic day, Nicolle Wallace is, I think, still with us. Nicolle, this is one of those times we lived through this. This is one of those times where you say, okay, it may have taken longer than people thought. It may have come about differently than people thought. We followed the facts. We don't always create them. And yet, I'm curious what you think, reflecting on this fact that and NYT first reported it, NBC News has it confirmed, and as I mentioned, Donald Trump's lawyers aren't denying it tonight. Donald Trump, the former president, has been notified that he has been indicted in New York. The next step of the legal process will be his booking, like any other human being, like any other person under the rule of law, to go through that and then be, if tried by a jury of his peers. What do you think about how we got to this point?
I have two thoughts. One, with Trump, there's always a threat of his own expression, human carnage. And when you listen to Michael Cohen, this is someone who didn't have sex with Stormy Daniels, whose campaign didn't benefit from silencing her, but he went to jail. This is also a story about, you can't tell a story about Donald Trump and the law without there being a chapter on his own Justice Department. SDNY, under Trump, under Barr, investigated this chapter and these acts and found that, quote, Donald Trump directed and coordinated a hush money scheme. So I am waiting to see what happened to the same evidence that Alvin Bragg marshaled in front of the New York grand jury that was marshaled years before Alvin Bragg ever held this office. So before Republicans run out and call Alvin Bragg political, a Republican-led Justice Department developed the same facts, interviewed the same witnesses, and came to the same conclusion. Now, because it's a state crime, you know this better than me, they're probably looking at the cover-up of those actions of directing and coordinating a hush money scheme. And that's even worse. That extends into the Oval Office, where he was writing hush money payments in installments for Stormy Daniels through Michael Cohen, who was, as Rudy Giuliani told us on Sean Hannity, a, quote, pass-through. So because it's Trump, there are human beings that were viewed as disposable to Trump, people who were once very close advisors. There's always a Barr story or angle. There's, oddly, always an SDNY thread. There's always an open question for Merrick Garland about what happened to these federal cases.
Yeah, and as you say, and Michael alluded to it earlier, Nicolle, there are other allegations. There's other criminal evidence of matters that could be more serious. When people say don't make a federal case out of it, there's a very serious open federal case regarding the insurrection against the United States, including a convicted sedition, and whether the tentacles of that reach back into Donald Trump's White House. As of now, no one that worked for him directly or he has been charged or held accountable for that. But I guess, before I go on to go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, if you and I did all three of these things, right? If you and I silenced a porn star to benefit our presidential campaign, if you and I incited a deadly insurrection, and if you and I took classified documents to Mar-a-Lago and said they're mine because I thought them declassified, we would be criminally exposed in all three jurisdictions, state and federal. It's only in conversations about Donald Trump that people are like, well, let's go with the best one. And frankly, that analysis has shifted too. Until classified documents were found at Pence's home and Biden's library, people thought Mar-a-Lago was the strongest prosecution. So, I'm not a lawyer, you are, but people should follow the facts and treat everybody the same. If you prosecute me, you should prosecute an ex-president.
Right, and I think where we go now is we're in a dividing line. March 30th here is the first day of the rest of Donald Trump's life. In a sense, it may be the first day in the rest of this political era we have been living through, because the seal is broken. It shows he can be charged. He is legally presumed innocent and entitled to all of the rights that you are supposed to get, even rights that he quite publicly as president tried to deny others, because it is the rule of law, and we are trying to have upholding civilized court process, even for people who wouldn't give it to others. Having said that, I think tomorrow and the days ahead are going to be very difficult for him, and other prosecutors don't even have to weigh what, lawyers call it prudential. That just means not legal, the other considerations. No other prosecutor now will ever have to weigh again the, quote, prudential question of the first indictment of a former president, because that's done.
It's been answered. The novelty is gone, which is just amazing in and of itself.
Yeah, so it's a novel night here in America. Thanks for staying on a little farther into our hour. I appreciate you, Nicolle.
The battle over a woman's right to choose, global economic challenges, the ongoing threat to democracy. When you sign up for the MSNBC Daily Newsletter, you're signing up to have a deeper understanding of today's biggest issues. Every morning you'll get insightful articles sent directly to your inbox, written by people you know and trust, like Hayes Brown and Mehdi Hassan, along with video highlights from your favorite MSNBC shows. Sign up for MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.